It's strange how life can change in an instant. One minute, I'm just an ordinary mechanic, getting greasy under the hood of someone else's car, and the next minute, I'm sitting in a sterile hospital room with a doctor telling me I have stage 2 lymphoma. Cancer. Those words hit like a freight train. My mind raced, trying to process everything, but I felt frozen in place, staring at the doctor's lips without hearing what came next. The room smelled like antiseptic, and I could feel the cold of the chair beneath me. The doctor sat across from me, his face a mixture of concern and professionalism, as though he had delivered this kind of news 1,000 times before. He went on, explaining the treatment options, the process, and what my chances were. But none of it mattered. What mattered was that my life had just been split in two. Everything I'd known was suddenly up in the air, and I had no idea how to catch it all. The doctor spoke calmly, offering words of comfort, but I could barely focus. I couldn't get past the word, cancer. The weight of it crushed me. I had been a mechanic for 10 years, living a routine life with Caitlin, my wife. We had talked about our future, our dreams of a house in the suburbs, maybe kids someday, but none of that seemed real anymore. Everything was a blur now. I nodded numbly as the doctor continued, but I didn't hear the specifics. I think he talked about chemotherapy, about possible remission, about risks and side effects, but all I could focus on was the fact that my body was betraying me. The life I thought I had built, the future I had envisioned, felt as fragile as a house of cards. One wrong move, and it could all come crashing down. I didn't want to burden Caitlin with the weight of this news over the phone. I wanted to see her, to hold her hand, to talk face to face. I needed to see her reaction, to feel her support. So, I called her. My stomach twisted in knots as I dialed her number, hoping she would answer and that she would be there for me. When she picked up, I tried to sound strong. I wanted to be calm, to tell her that everything was going to be okay, even though I wasn't sure it was. But her response was anything but what I expected. "I'm busy, Jason. I can't meet you right now," she said, her voice distant and unrecognizable. My heart sank into my stomach. The tone was cold, detached. It wasn't like her. She had always been my rock, the one person I could rely on. So why was she acting like this? I tried to press her, asking if she could find some time later, but she just brushed me off. "I have too much going on. I'll call you later," she said before hanging up. I stood there in the middle of the shop, the phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the wall. It was like everything around me went quiet. No sounds from the shop, no traffic outside, just the pulse of my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. I couldn't understand it. Caitlin was always there when things got tough. She was supposed to be here now. But instead, I was standing alone in a cold, empty space, facing something that felt too big to handle on my own. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. Something didn't feel right. Something in her voice, in the way she dismissed me, unsettled me. It wasn't like her at all. I thought back to the last few days, trying to find something that might explain her behavior, but everything seemed normal. Or at least, I thought it was. We had a couple of arguments here and there, small things, trivial stuff. I had been working a lot, and she had been spending more time at home, but that wasn't anything new. It didn't make sense. But that feeling, that gnawing feeling, didn't leave me. It stayed with me all the way home. When I arrived at our house later that night, the unease in my gut turned to dread. I opened the door, expecting to find Caitlin, maybe sitting on the couch watching TV or cooking dinner, but the house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. It was like the life had been drained from the place. I called out for her, but there was no answer. The silence was suffocating. I moved through the house, and that's when I saw it. The closet doors wide open, her things were gone. Her clothes, her shoes, the jewelry she used to keep on the dresser. All of it was gone. It was as though she had disappeared without a trace. Panic began to rise in my chest. I checked the kitchen, hoping I had just missed her, but there was nothing. No sign of her, no note, nothing to explain where she had gone. I froze in the hallway, staring at the emptiness. Then, I saw it. A text message notification on my phone. The message was from Caitlin. "You weren't ready for this." The words hit me harder than anything the doctor had said. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Was she talking about the cancer? Was she saying she couldn't deal with it? Or was there something else? It didn't make sense. I wanted to scream, to call her, to demand an explanation. But I couldn't. I felt too numb, too hurt. The betrayal was sharper than the fear of cancer. At that moment, I realized something that made my stomach twist: Caitlin wasn't coming back. With trembling hands, I typed a reply, my fingers slow, almost reluctant. "Goodbye." I stood there, my phone in my hand, the weight of her departure pressing down on me. The emptiness of the house felt suffocating, and all I could think was that I was alone. Alone with my diagnosis, with the reality that my wife had just walked out on me, without a single explanation. I dropped the phone on the counter, my hands shaking. I didn't know how to process it, how to move forward. How could I? I had no answers, only questions. And the biggest one of all, why? Why had Caitlin left me like this? Everything felt like it was falling apart. The life I had known, the future I had planned, it was all gone. And all I had left was the cold reality of what was happening to me. I don't think I'll ever forget the feeling of standing in that empty house. It wasn't just the absence of Caitlin that hit me, it was the void that suddenly existed in my life. Everything felt hollow. The silence in the house was deafening, almost as if the walls were closing in on me. I stood in the middle of the living room, unsure of what to do next, my mind still racing from the bombshell the doctor had dropped on me that day, and now this. My whole world had been upended. The house felt different now, as though the air itself had changed. I moved through each room in a daze, expecting to find some trace of Caitlin, some explanation for what had happened, but there was nothing. It was like she had been erased from the house, nothing but empty spaces and the faintest traces of her presence. I glanced into the bedroom. Her side of the bed was made up neatly, as if she'd never left, and the dresser that used to be cluttered with her things was now bare. No shoes, no perfume bottles, no framed photos of us together. Even the small trinkets she had collected over the years, the ones that held sentimental value, were gone. It hit me like a wave, the crushing realization that I was utterly alone. Not just with the cancer diagnosis, but in life. How could she just leave like that? We had been together for years, built a life together. Sure, things weren't perfect, but we had always worked through our problems. At least, that's what I thought. But now, I was faced with the brutal truth: she was gone, and whatever had been between us didn't matter anymore. I stood there in the living room, staring at the empty space where she used to be, until I felt the buzz of my phone vibrating in my pocket. My heart skipped a beat as I pulled it out. I expected it to be her, but it wasn't. It was a text from Caitlin, just one simple sentence: "You weren't ready for this." The word stung. I had no idea what she meant by that, but I could feel the weight of her departure in every letter. Was she talking about the cancer? Was that her reason for leaving? Or had something else been going on that I hadn't seen? I stood there, holding the phone in my hand, staring at the message. Part of me wanted to reply, to ask her for an explanation, to beg her to come back. But what good would it do? What was the point? I wasn't sure I even wanted to hear the truth anymore. All I could do was stare at the screen, the blinking cursor mocking me. In a moment of clarity, I made the decision. I wasn't going to beg her. I wasn't going to chase her. I had enough to deal with as it was. With the cancer diagnosis weighing heavily on me, the last thing I needed was someone who couldn't even be bothered to stand by me when things got tough. The betrayal stung, but I knew I had to let it go. I wasn't going to let her actions destroy me any more than the disease already had. So, I typed back, as coldly as I could manage, "Goodbye." It was the hardest thing I had ever written. But as soon as I sent it, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I was done. I had to be. There was no more room in my life for someone who didn't have the decency to be there when I needed them the most. I sat down on the couch, running my hands through my hair, trying to steady my thoughts. How did I get here? How did my life go from being a mechanic, a guy who loved his wife, to being abandoned by the woman I trusted? I didn't have answers, and I wasn't sure I would ever find them. But something in me clicked in that moment. I couldn't keep spiraling. I had cancer now, and that was the battle I needed to focus on. If she wanted to leave, then fine. I would focus on my health, my future, and whatever was left of my dignity. It wasn't easy, not by a long shot, but I knew I couldn't let this woman's betrayal destroy me. I had to be stronger than that. As the night dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling of her absence. I tried to keep myself busy, but everything I did just felt pointless. I went through the motions, doing things around the house, but the silence was suffocating. I couldn't avoid it. I couldn't escape it. The weight of everything, my diagnosis, her departure, pressed down on me harder with every minute that passed. I made my way to the kitchen, hoping that maybe cooking something would calm my nerves, but the thought of eating didn't feel right. I couldn't even stomach the idea. Instead, I just stood there by the sink, staring out the window into the dark night. The streetlights flickered, casting a pale glow over the neighborhood, and for a moment, I felt like I was the only person in the world. That's when it hit me. For all the time we spent together, for all the promises and dreams we shared, Caitlin had walked out. She didn't even have the decency to explain herself. She was gone, and I was left here to deal with it. I couldn't help but feel a wave of anger rising within me. How could she do this? How could she leave when I needed her most? But then, just as quickly, the anger faded, replaced by a cold, empty numbness. There was no point in holding on to that anger anymore. I was still in shock, still processing everything, but I knew one thing for certain: I had to keep going. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Cancer was a fight I didn't know if I could win, and now, I had to fight against betrayal too. But I wasn't going to let this beat me. I wouldn't let it. The house felt too big now, too quiet. I took a deep breath, gathering whatever strength I had left. I wasn't alone, not entirely. There were still people who cared about me, neighbors, friends who had always been there. I could lean on them, even if I didn't want to. But for now, I needed to rest. The tears had started to form, but I pushed them back, telling myself that I couldn't break down just yet. I had to be strong. For myself, for my future. I couldn't let the pain consume me. Not now. Not when I had so much to fight for. The days after Caitlin left felt like a blur, an endless cycle of numbness and pain. I went through the motions of life, working at the shop, making sure I kept busy, but every moment felt like I was just existing. I wasn't living. I wasn't even sure I could. The cancer diagnosis still weighed heavily on me. It was hard to think of anything else when I could feel my body betraying me in ways I didn't understand. But what made it worse was the complete absence of Caitlin. I couldn't escape the reality that she had left me, just like that. She wasn't even willing to stand by me while I fought for my life. How was I supposed to cope with both the cancer and her betrayal? It was as though the ground beneath me had opened up, swallowing me whole. But I had to move forward. I had no choice. I wasn't going to let Caitlin's actions define me. I was going to focus on my health, on getting better. She had made her decision to walk away, but I still had a life to fight for. I called my doctor the next day and scheduled an appointment to discuss my treatment plan. The thought of chemotherapy terrified me, but I knew I had no other option. The idea of fighting cancer alone, without the support of the woman I had married, was crushing. But in some strange way, it also made me more determined to get through it. I didn't need her. I never did. If she couldn't handle my illness, then it was better that she wasn't here. As the days passed, I realized something. I was angry. Not just at Caitlin, but at myself. How could I have been so blind to everything that had been going on? I had been working long hours at the shop, doing everything I could to provide for us, while she had been planning her escape. Had it always been this way? Had she just been waiting for an excuse to leave? The thought of her taking our money, emptying our joint bank account, made my blood boil. I hadn't realized it at first, but it became clear over time. She didn't just leave me emotionally, she left me financially, too. She had taken everything, leaving me with nothing but the bills and a house that now felt like a prison. I didn't know where she had gone or what she was doing, but I knew she wasn't coming back. Not now, not ever. But as angry as I was, I couldn't let it consume me. I had to stay focused on my health, on my treatment. I couldn't afford to let Caitlin's actions drag me down further. I wasn't sure how much time I had left, but I knew I couldn't waste it on bitterness or resentment. I had to be stronger than that. I spent the next few days trying to keep myself together. I told myself I couldn't break down, that I had to stay strong. But there were moments when the weight of everything became too much. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing as if I had just run a marathon. I would think about Caitlin, about the life we had built together, and then I would remember that it was all gone. And it would hit me all over again. But during those dark moments, I also realized something else. I was alone, yes, but I wasn't helpless. I still had control over my life, and I still had choices. Caitlin had made hers, and now I had to make mine. I reached out to my uncle, Michael, who had always been a solid presence in my life. He was a financial advisor, and I knew he could help me sort through the mess Caitlin had left behind. I couldn't let her take everything from me, and I wasn't going to let her walk away with our hard-earned savings. I needed to protect myself, even if it meant taking steps that felt uncomfortable. Michael was more than willing to help. He came over to the house a few days later, and we sat down at the kitchen table, going over my finances. I explained the situation to him, telling him everything about Caitlin's departure and how she had drained our bank account. Michael didn't say much at first. He just listened, nodding as I spoke. When I finished, he took a deep breath and said, "We'll get this sorted out, Jason. Don't worry. You've been through enough already. We'll make sure she doesn't take everything." I appreciated his reassurance, but I also knew this was going to be a long, painful battle. It wasn't just the money, it was everything. Caitlin had broken me in ways I hadn't expected. I never imagined she could walk away, let alone do it so coldly, so easily. But Michael's words gave me some hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to protect myself. It was the first time in days that I felt like I wasn't completely powerless. I wasn't sure how I was going to rebuild my life, but I knew I had to try. For myself. For my future. As I left Michael's house later that evening, I felt a small sense of relief. The weight on my chest wasn't as heavy as it had been. I had a plan. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could actually fight back. But as I drove home, a nagging thought crept into my mind. What if Caitlin came back? What if she regretted leaving? I pushed that thought away. No. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I couldn't go back to her. Not after everything she had done. But the uncertainty remained. And deep down, I knew that this was just the beginning of what was going to be a long, difficult journey. The cancer. The divorce. The betrayal. They were all part of my new reality, and I had no choice but to face them head-on. The days blurred into one another. I'd go to work, pushing through each shift with the weight of my diagnosis hanging over me, and then return home to face the cold emptiness that Caitlin had left behind. Each night, the loneliness felt heavier, like a burden I couldn't shake off. I had moments where I wished I could go back in time, where I could have done something differently, where I could have been enough for her. But the reality was, Caitlin was gone, and I had to face the fallout from her departure. The cancer was still there. That wasn't going away. Chemotherapy was a constant in my life now, and I couldn't afford to let the rest of my life crumble around it. As much as the physical pain of the illness took its toll, it was the emotional pain, the betrayal, that was harder to bear. Caitlin had taken so much from me, not just my money, but my trust, my sense of security. It felt like she had stripped everything I valued, and I was left with nothing but the broken pieces of a life I had once thought was solid. That's when I decided I needed to take control. I couldn't just let her have everything. I couldn't let her leave me with nothing but my illness and her absence. I needed to protect myself. I needed to make sure I had something to fall back on. I called Michael again. I needed his help with more than just the financial situation. I needed someone who could guide me through the mess I was in, someone who could give me advice on how to safeguard what little I had left. He agreed to meet me the following evening, and we sat down at the kitchen table again, a place that had once felt warm and full of life, but now felt more like a war room. "All right, Jason," Michael said, his voice steady and calm. "We're going to get things in order. First, we need to make sure your assets are protected." I nodded, trying to push aside the knot in my stomach. My mind kept wandering back to Caitlin, to the way she had taken everything from me without a second thought. But I had to focus. I had to. Michael helped me go through all my financial documents, updating everything to ensure that my assets were secure. He helped me set up new bank accounts, making sure the money that had been drained from the joint account was moved into my own name. I was setting up a fortress, brick by brick, even as my health was crumbling around me. The legal side of things was next. Michael suggested I reach out to a lawyer, someone who could help me protect myself against any future claims Caitlin might make. He recommended a woman named Catherine, a tough, no-nonsense lawyer who had a reputation for winning difficult cases. I didn't know much about her, but Michael seemed confident that she would be able to handle things, especially with the way Caitlin had acted. It wasn't easy. The idea of involving lawyers, of going down that path, felt foreign to me. Caitlin and I had always been able to work things out. But this wasn't the same as the petty arguments we used to have. This was a betrayal on a level I had never anticipated, and it had turned my life upside down. I called Catherine the next day. She was direct, efficient, and immediately asked for all the documentation I had, bank statements, proof of Caitlin's actions, and any other evidence I could provide. The legal battle had officially begun, and there was no turning back now. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing more than just my wife. I was losing my sense of self. The cancer, the betrayal, it was all too much. But somehow, I knew I had to keep fighting. I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her take everything from me, not without a fight. The next few days were a blur of legal papers and meetings. Catherine was thorough, asking me about every detail of my relationship with Caitlin, every interaction we had ever had, everything that had led to this point. She was building a case, and it felt like every question she asked reopened wounds I wasn't sure I could handle. But she also gave me something I hadn't had in weeks, a sense of direction. She made it clear that Caitlin couldn't just take everything and walk away. There were laws, rights, and protections in place. And for the first time since Caitlin had left, I felt like I was taking control again. I also made sure I was taking care of myself physically. The chemotherapy treatments were draining, leaving me exhausted and nauseous, but I kept pushing forward. I didn't want to fall apart. I couldn't afford to. Every time I felt the weight of the illness trying to drag me down, I reminded myself that I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for whatever came next. The future was uncertain, and that was terrifying, but I had to face it. I wasn't going to let Caitlin's actions destroy me, not physically, not emotionally. I had to survive this. For my own sake. Over the next couple of weeks, I continued to meet with Catherine, updating her on anything new that came up. I didn't hear from Caitlin again, but I wasn't expecting to. She had made her choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. The legal battle was just beginning, but I wasn't going to let it define me. There were bigger battles to fight. I had learned one thing in the midst of this whirlwind of pain and uncertainty: no matter how much it hurt, I was still standing. I was still here. And that was enough for now. It had been weeks since Caitlin left, and yet, the pain still lingered. Every corner of my house reminded me of her absence. The emptiness, the silence. It felt suffocating. I'd walk through the living room and expect to see her sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her laughter echoing from the kitchen as she prepared dinner. But there was nothing. The house had turned into a hollow shell, and every time I walked through it, it reminded me of how things had fallen apart. I thought back to our marriage, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when things had started to go wrong. I knew Caitlin came from money, wealthy parents who didn't quite understand my blue-collar background, my life as a mechanic. At first, it hadn't bothered me. I thought we could make it work. I was proud of what I did. I loved my job. But as time passed, I began to feel like I was an outsider in my own marriage, a piece that didn't quite fit. Her parents were always polite, but I could tell they didn't think much of me. It was in the way they looked at me when they thought I wasn't paying attention, in the quiet comments they made when I wasn't around. At first, it stung. But over time, I got used to it. I told myself I didn't care what they thought. But maybe deep down, I did. Maybe it had chipped away at me more than I realized. Caitlin didn't make things easier. She would get quiet when her parents would make remarks, offering excuses for their behavior, telling me it was just their way of showing concern. But I knew the truth. It was never just concern. They looked at me like I wasn't good enough for their precious daughter. And at some point, I began to believe them. I tried to make it work. I tried to be the supportive husband, doing everything I could to keep her happy, to build a future together. But as the years went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. We started to drift apart. We didn't talk as much, didn't spend as much time together. Our conversations, once filled with excitement and shared dreams, became mundane, transactional. Caitlin started talking more and more about moving to Los Angeles, about pursuing her career, about finding bigger opportunities. It wasn't the first time she had brought it up, but each time it felt more serious. I couldn't help but wonder if that was her way of preparing me for what was coming. Maybe she had already made up her mind. Maybe I was just a placeholder until she found something, or someone, better. I couldn't deny that I felt like I was losing her. And in a way, I was. But I still tried to hold on. I thought if I worked harder, if I did more, if I became more successful, I could make her stay. But no matter what I did, it didn't seem to matter. The distance between us grew, and eventually, I found myself wondering if I was even a part of her life anymore. Now, in the aftermath of her leaving, the truth was painfully clear. The cracks that had been there for years had finally shattered. Caitlin didn't just leave me emotionally, she left me financially, too. She had taken everything, every penny from our joint account, every shred of trust one had in her. And for what? A new life? A new beginning? A fresh start in Los Angeles, away from the life we had built together? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I had worked hard to provide for us, to make sure we had everything we needed. I wasn't perfect, but I had always tried. And she had just walked away without a second thought, without even an explanation. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And all I had left were the remnants of a life I no longer recognized. I tried not to let the anger consume me. I knew that getting caught up in bitterness would only make things worse. But how could I not feel betrayed? How could I not be angry at the woman who had taken everything from me, who had promised to stand by my side, only to walk away the moment things got tough? The hardest part was accepting the fact that this was it. This was the end of our marriage. There was no going back, no fixing things. I had tried for years to make it work, to hold on to something that, in hindsight, was already broken. And now, Caitlin was gone, and I had nothing left but the fallout. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to move forward from here. I wasn't sure what the future held. All I knew was that I couldn't keep holding on to the past. I had to focus on myself. On my health. On my recovery. On making sure that I didn't let Caitlin's actions define who I was. But that didn't make it any easier. The betrayal still hurt. It still stung. And no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the memories would always be there, lurking in the background, reminding me of the life I had lost. I couldn't help but wonder if Caitlin had ever truly cared for me. Or if I had just been a stepping stone in her life, a means to an end. The thought twisted inside me, but I tried to push it aside. The answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was taking control of my life, moving forward, and rebuilding what had been broken. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But I knew I had to try. For myself. For my future. As I sat in the quiet of the empty house, I took a deep breath, letting the weight of everything wash over me. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew I had to face it head on. One step at a time.